Hey, what do you think about this woman?
Wow. She's stunning.
Right? I'm thinking of divorcing your mom and marrying her instead. What do you think?
That's awesome. We totally support you.
The three sons immediately showed their excitement at the idea of their mom being replaced by this beautiful woman. After seeing the picture of their dad, Nick's mistress, they fully supported Nick and my divorce without hesitation. I've worked so hard to raise you, and you have no gratitude?
Don't be so self-righteous. You chose to have us on your own. We're tired of your boring meals. You should just hire a housekeeper for the cleaning and laundry.
Steve, the eldest son, Arnold, the second son, and Cody, the youngest, started speaking their minds, saying whatever they wanted. It was clear that not only Nick, but also the boys no longer saw any value in me. There was no sign of appreciation for what I had done. Realizing that I was no longer needed by this family, I decided to leave the house without hesitation. A year after the divorce, I happened to run into Nick and the boys. They were stunned when they saw me.
How on earth can a woman who works from home live such a luxurious life?
When they found out that I was enjoying my life after the divorce, Nick and the boys regretted their actions and begged for my forgiveness. But I would never forgive them. My name is Risa. I was just an ordinary office worker in a typical company. I met Nick through a mutual colleague, and we got married. I want you to be a housewife and support me. And so, at Nick's request, I resigned from my job. After that, we were blessed with 3 sons. The boys grew up healthy and dedicated themselves to their studies, each pursuing their own paths. Nick, who worked for a large company, had a strong sense of pride and a competitive nature, which helped him climb the ranks to become the head of the accounting department. It was only a matter of time before he would be promoted to a managerial position. Nick was dedicated to his work, and the boys were busy with their studies. I was proud of them. As a housewife, I believed it was my role to support them from behind the scenes. So, I made sure to keep the house spotless and prepared nutritious meals for everyone. As the children grew older, many of my friends left their roles as housewives and returned to the workforce. However, Nick was extremely busy, and he was terrible at household chores, just like the boys. With all that, I knew that if I took on a part-time job, let alone a full-time one, I wouldn't have enough time to take care of the boys and manage the household. So, I decided to start working from home, doing computer-based freelance work that a friend introduced me to. Working from home meant I didn't have to commute, and I had the flexibility to manage my time. Although the income was modest, I didn't mind because I enjoyed keeping my hands busy.
Are you still doing that pathetic work from home job? How boring you are.
My laptop was spread out on the table in the living room. As I was working on another task for just 10 cents, Nick looked at it and laughed mockingly. Sure, it takes time, and it doesn't make much money, but it's actually pretty fun once you get into it.
Well, it suits you perfectly. But not for me, that's for sure.
Is she really doing that lame work from home thing again? How much do you make for each task? Steve chimed in, echoing Nick's disdainful tone as he walked into the room. Don't say that. It's just 10 cents per task, but if you do enough, it adds up. 10 cents? You can't buy anything with that. This is a total waste of time. Leave me alone. I'm not bothering you, am I? And this still helps with the household expenses. Nick mocking me was nothing new, but recently, the 3 boys had started to join in, looking down on me just like their father. My sons were high school and junior high school students. Maybe it was just that awkward age when mothers become annoying to their kids. I kept telling myself their attitudes would mellow out with time, but still, their words hurt me daily. Dinner's ready, everyone. That evening, like always, I prepared dinner, set the table, and called the family. They all reluctantly gathered in the dining room. As soon as they saw what was served, the boys started to complain.
Ugh! What is this?
Vegetables were on sale again. They're delicious.
Just vegetables? This is so depressing. We're growing teenagers. We need more meat.
What are you talking about? I carefully planned this meal with a balanced diet in mind, so stop complaining.
Oh. I wish we could have steak or pizza sometimes. Mom's cooking is always so bland, and I'm really getting tired of it.
We do eat out occasionally. Stop being so demanding. If we ate out every time you wanted, we'd go broke. Even though I argued back, the boys still sat down at the table, grumbling about their dissatisfaction. These kinds of petty squabbles were a daily occurrence, especially since they were going through puberty. But their rebelliousness had another cause. Nick's influence.
I want to eat something more luxurious too. Can't you make turkey sometimes? I come home exhausted from work, and all I get is this animal feed full of vegetables. It's awful. Stop complaining all the time. It's your attitude that's making the kids act so spoiled. Huh? Are you blaming me now? It's your boring meals that are the problem. Stop shifting the blame. You always call my meals boring, but it's tough trying to plan balanced meals within your salary. Fine, I get it.
Nick clicked his tongue but reluctantly started eating dinner. It was always like this. For the past few years, Nick had increasingly criticized me. And, just like him, the boys had started to make it a habit to belittle me. I had become the emotional punching bag for the entire family. After that dinner, I went into the kitchen to clean up. The rest of the family gathered in the living room to watch TV. Despite their constant complaints, none of them ever offered to help with the housework.
Wow. She's so cute. How do idols always have such clear skin? Well, it's because they're young. A far cry from someone we know,
Nick said, glancing in my direction, with that same mocking smirk on his face.
It's not just about youth. Look, this actress is the same age as Mom, but she's gorgeous. The world's unfair, isn't it? There are guys who get to marry such beautiful actresses.
Yeah, compared to her mom.
Mom has completely given up on being a woman. Her cooking is plain, her face is plain, and she doesn't even wear makeup. She's just done.
We really have it tough, don't we?
No doubt about it.
They all burst into laughter. What an awful atmosphere. I'd been feeling this way more and more lately. I had to listen to conversations like this every day. Sometimes I tried to argue back, but with 4 against 1, there was no way I could win. So, I just endured it silently, but living like this was piling up the stress. Nick used to be so kind. And my sons, too, they used to say,
"Mom, I love you."
But now, tears welled up in my eyes as I remembered the kind family they once were. Now, there wasn't a single person in this house who was on my side. And then one day, something happened that would mark the end of this miserable family life. Why are your clothes just thrown around like this? How can you be so sloppy? While Nick was taking a shower after coming home from work, I picked up the clothes he had carelessly discarded in the bathroom. Nick had always been a messy person, leaving his clothes scattered everywhere. If I didn't pick them up, the house would quickly become a mess. So, it had become my routine to clean up after him. I picked up the shirt that was lying on the floor. As I picked up the shirt, I noticed something strange.
What's that smell?
It wasn't detergent or body odor. It was an unpleasant scent. It was the smell of a woman's perfume. A strong fragrance was wafting from the clothes Nick had just taken off. Wondering what this could mean, I examined the shirt closely and found lipstick smudged on the collar.
Could this really be an affair?
The clear evidence of contact with another woman made my blood run cold. I immediately confronted Nick as he stepped out of the shower. I expected him to come up with some excuse, but his reaction was completely unexpected. "Oh, so you found out. I let my guard down because you never noticed before."
What do you mean by before?
You really are clueless. Even when I said I was working late and came home late, you never suspected a thing. It made it easy for me to cheat whenever I wanted. In recent years, Nick had often said, "Work is busy," and his overtime and weekend work had increased. But it was all lies. He shamelessly admitted that he had been meeting with his mistress instead. "The kids are grown now, so I don't need to be with you anymore. I'm sick of looking at your plain face every day. Hey, boys. Come here for a minute, I need to talk to you." Nick called out to our sons in their rooms. Wondering what was going on, the three of them came out. Nick pulled out his mobile phone and showed them the screen. "So, what do you think of this woman?"
Whoa! She's gorgeous.
"Right? I'm thinking of divorcing your mom and marrying her instead. What do you think?"
Huh? So, she'll be our new mom? That's awesome. I'm all for it.
The boys eagerly grabbed at the phone, staring at the screen.
Dad, you have to remarry. If she's our mom, I'll be a good boy. We're not against it at all. Let's swap moms.
Well. I'm glad you all like her. Guess what? She's a current model.
Really? No wonder she's so pretty. She's nothing like Mom. Yes. We're getting a new mom. How can you say that?
I was speechless at my son's heartless reactions. Normally, wouldn't they beg us not to divorce? But all three of them were completely ignoring my feelings, excitedly praising Nick's new wife-to-be.
How could you say that? I've done my best to raise you all these years. Don't you have any gratitude? Gratitude? You were the one who decided to have us. Yeah, just because you're our mom doesn't mean you get to act all high and mighty.
Exactly. Compared to this woman, you're so plain and, well, kind of poor-looking. We don't really need you around. My sons began voicing their complaints, saying things like, "We're sick of your boring meals. We could just hire a housekeeper to do the laundry and cleaning." There wasn't a trace of gratitude in their words. All right. I understand how you feel. You're saying I'm not needed in this house anymore.
Finally, you're getting it. That's exactly what we're saying. Now, let's get divorced.
With the support of our sons, Nick was beaming with satisfaction. How could I not be angry after hearing all this? Fine. I'll leave this house. Enjoy your new mother.
Goodbye. You don't have to tell me twice. I'm sure you'll struggle, but good luck.
None of them tried to stop me, and they all wore smug smiles. Having had enough of this family, I immediately packed my things and left the house. Soon after, I sent the divorce papers through a lawyer, and Nick and I finalized our divorce quickly. Nick got custody of the children, and we offset child support with any alimony.
You're just a housewife with only an income from working at home. Too bad you won't get any money.
Nick looked down on me with a triumphant attitude, but I didn't care about the money. All I wanted was to get the divorce finalized as quickly as possible. The emotional pain of being betrayed by my entire family would not heal easily. So I wanted to start a new life in a new place as soon as possible and forget about the past. With that in mind, I immediately started looking for a new home. A year has passed since then. After finishing my shopping, I parked my car in the garage as usual. Suddenly, several men appeared in front of me. They looked disheveled and somewhat shabby. It took me a moment to recognize them, but when I looked closer, I realized it was my ex-husband Nick and my 3 sons. "What do you want? What are you doing here?" We were supposed to have completely severed ties after the divorce. I had a bad feeling about this.
"Mom, please help us."
Steve rushed over to me, almost in tears, clinging to me desperately. They began explaining how they had found my house. A few days ago, they had spotted me while I was shopping in town and decided to follow me. Normally, you wouldn't follow a mother you had abandoned. But they had a reason for wanting to follow me.
"How can someone like you, who only does remote work, afford to shop at such an upscale store?"
Nick, still in disbelief, demanded answers in a harsh tone. Judging by their appearance, it was clear they didn't have any money. Meanwhile, I now owned a company and lived in a luxurious neighborhood known in this area. The store where they had spotted me was a high-end brand boutique that the average person would not easily step into. Noticing my well-dressed appearance by chance, my former family had caught the scent of money.
"How can you, who only worked from home, afford to live in a house like this? Are you some rich man's mistress or something?"
I was taken aback by Nick's sudden appearance and accusatory tone. Even after the divorce, he still wanted to belittle me, but I certainly hadn't become wealthy by relying on someone else, as Nick suggested. I had kept it a secret from the family, but I actually had a substantial fortune. Before getting married, when I was working as an office employee, I had started investing with my retirement money. Now, that investment had grown to a value of $5 million, allowing me to live comfortably without having to work.
"If that's the case, then you didn't need to do remote work at all,"
Nick shouted when I confessed this to him.
"The profits I made from my investments are my personal assets. And besides, I enjoyed doing remote work. I knew if I told you and the boys about the money, you'd all just become dependent on me. So there's no reason for you to blame me for keeping it a secret."
Nick was right. I didn't need to do remote work at all. But I had started it to have something to talk about with my mom friends, who were also doing remote work. And I continued it as a hobby because I enjoyed the meticulous tasks, even if it didn't bring in much money.
Remote work was actually a lot of fun. Oh, and after we separated, I threw myself into real estate investments to keep myself busy. My assets just kept growing, and now I'm struggling with tax issues."
Nick and even my sons couldn't hide their shock at my words. Seeing my sons for the first time in a while, I noticed they looked pale and unhealthy, far worse than before. "You all look pretty unwell. Are you eating properly?" Even though Nick had custody, they were still my sons. And I couldn't help but worry about them.
"That woman's ruined everything for us,"
Steve responded to my concern with bitter complaints. It turns out that Nick's affair partner, Cindy, who he had planned to marry, never intended to marry him. She had only used her charms to get close to him for his money. Nick, who had fallen in love with her at first sight in a nightclub, had been treating her to expensive dinners and showering her with luxury brand gifts. But when he finally proposed to her, she bluntly turned him down, saying,
"I'm not interested in some older guy with kids and a divorce history."
However, Nick, unable to give up on her, hired a private investigator to track down where she lived. It turned out she was actually married and was also involved with another man.
"That woman deceived me. She said she was single, but I never imagined she was married. She tricked me."
Nick seemed deeply frustrated at having been fooled. But this was the same man who had abandoned me in the first place.
Mom, we've realized how much we need you since living apart. Yeah, without you, the house is filthy, and we're sick of eating nothing but store-bought meals. Please, come back and help us.
My sons began tearfully pleading with me to return home.
All right.
I let out a sigh, and, overwhelmed by their persistence, I told them I would come back. They all cheered gleefully, shouting,
Yay!
However, deep down, I was utterly exasperated by their selfishness. When I visited what was once my home, the inside was filled with discarded clothes and accumulated garbage, producing a foul odor. Since I left, no one had been doing any housework, leading to constant complaints from the neighbors. Why are there 4 grown men in this house, yet no one cleans up?
What? Housework is a woman's job, isn't it? Why should a man have to do it?
Now that you're back, things will go back to normal, right?
Oh, thank goodness. I was getting sick of living in such a filthy house.
Their selfish attitudes made me realize that I had failed in raising my children. Influenced by Nick, my sons had grown into men who couldn't do anything for themselves but were full of complaints.
If Mom's rich, then we can say goodbye to living in poverty, right?
Living in poverty? But Dad has an income, doesn't he?
Well,
according to my sons, Nick had spent most of his income on his affair partner. Although they should have had some savings, those had quickly run out. And they were now in a situation where they couldn't afford to pay for the 3 boys' education. Steve and Arnold had dropped out of high school, and Cody had even given up on going to high school altogether.
So we're all working part-time, but even then, it's tough for the 4 of us to make ends meet.
On top of that, Nick, unable to manage the debts, had gone so far as to misuse his position as an accountant to embezzle money from his company. The embezzlement was quickly discovered, but fearing damage to their corporate image, the company reported it to the police, leading to Nick's dismissal from his job. Although Nick struggled daily to find a new job, rumors of the embezzlement had spread, and he was having difficulty securing employment. In an attempt to cope with the stress, Nick turned to alcohol, and combined with an unhealthy diet, he was now suffering from illness.
Please, help us!
Prideful Nick had swallowed his pride and was begging me for help. It was clear that their situation had reached a very desperate point.
We can't do anything without you, Mom. We're begging you too. Please come back.
My sons joined in, pleading along with Nick. All 4 of them bowed their heads to me. However, I felt no inclination to help them. This is your own fault, isn't it? After everything you did, how dare you come crawling back to someone you threw away? I looked down at them coldly as I spoke. They probably thought that if they begged tearfully, I would forgive them, but that wasn't going to happen. There was no way I could forget the way they had treated me.
You told me you didn't need a plain wife or mother. Well, I feel the same. No matter how much you bow your heads, I don't need a husband or sons who mock and discard others.
As I spoke, I took my wallet out of my bag. There was $1,000 in it. I placed it on the table.
Consider this your severance pay. Never show yourselves in front of me again. Nick, and you boys as well, stop relying on others and figure things out for yourselves. It's pathetic.
I glared at the 4 of them as I said this. They muttered, "But," and hung their heads. I left the living room and closed the door behind me. The moment I did, I heard them fighting over the money from the living room, shouting,
"That's my money!"
Seeing how far they had fallen saddened me, but I hoped they would somehow manage to survive on their own. After that, Nick and the boys sold the house they had been living in and moved into a smaller one. Although Nick struggled to find a new job, he eventually managed to get hired by a construction company. where he worked long hours doing unfamiliar manual labor from morning until evening to take care of his sons. It seemed that he had finally developed a sense of responsibility as a father. It was likely a tough life, but I heard he was working hard without complaining. Just like their father, Steve and Arnold were also working and living on site. As for Cody, who had dropped out and couldn't attend high school, he was now going to high school while working part-time to help with the family's finances. They had not escaped poverty yet, but knowing that they were living much more decently than before gave me some peace of mind. Even though I had left because I was fed up with their terrible treatment, they were once my precious family. I truly hope that from now on, they'll grow into adults who can take care of themselves. That's what I thought. Meanwhile, I decided to remodel a room in my house and start a handicraft class. I've always been good with my hands, so I thought I'd turn something I love into a job. Nowadays, word of mouth has brought many students to my classes, and we enjoy a fun time together, often ending the lessons with a tea party. Although I was betrayed by my family and left all alone, this has allowed me to live freely and without being looked down upon by anyone. Even though I'm apart from my sons, I pray for their health and happiness while embracing a life where I can do as I please from now on.
You cheated on me, didn't you?
My husband Tom was holding our newborn baby and shouted right in front of me. I had just finished the huge task of giving birth and returned to my hospital room, and that's what my husband said to me.
What are you talking about?
I had absolutely no idea what he meant. I've been faithful to Tom since before we got married, and I have no reason to do something like that after getting married. I couldn't understand why he would say such a thing, and I was furious that he would say that to his wife right after giving birth.
This baby's eyes are blue. You cheated on me with a foreigner, didn't you? That's impossible!
I yelled back without thinking. I retorted while enduring the pain in my body. Tom quickly put the baby in the bassinet, as if he had touched something dirty. I was angry that he reacted that way to our own child. I picked the baby back up. The baby suddenly opened its eyes. They were clear blue eyes, like glass. How? Both Tom and I have brown eyes. I've never seen eyes this blue before.
I really didn't cheat on you. I have no idea why this happened. Don't lie. There's no other explanation except that you cheated. I'm telling you, it's not possible. I really don't know why.
I gave birth to this child myself, so there's no doubt it's my baby. I've never heard of any foreigners in my or Tom's family. If that's the case, I truly don't understand why this child has blue eyes.
Please, let's do a DNA test.
A DNA test should prove this child's relationship to Tom. When I desperately pleaded, Tom stared at me intently.
If this child isn't yours, I'll divorce you. I'll even pay alimony. But I really have no idea how this happened. This is your child. Please, just let me prove it.
Tom's voice echoed in the silent hospital room. His answer was, "My name is Sophie. I'm turning 29 this year. I work an office job at a company in Boston. I was born in the South, but I've lived in Boston ever since I got into college. I'm married to Tom, who is 1 year older than me, and we live together. Tom works at a sports equipment company. Having grown up in a snowy area, I joined the ski club as soon as I started college. Tom was an upperclassman in the club at the time. He wasn't as used to snow as I was. But he loves sports and got hooked on skiing during a high school trip, so he went to ski resorts whenever he had the chance after that. He's quite skilled. Tom and I hit it off right away, since we both wanted to improve our skiing techniques. We always participated in the club's ski trips together, so naturally we started spending more time together and got closer. Then 6 months later, Tom said he wanted to date me seriously. That's how we became a couple, and our relationship progressed smoothly after that. After graduating, we both started working in Boston. I had become a working adult 1 year earlier. I moved into Tom's apartment and we started living together. Of course, the reason we chose to live together was that we wanted to be with each other. But that wasn't the only reason. Before graduating, we had discussed that we wanted to get married eventually, so establishing a financial foundation came first. If I lived in Tom's place, we could put all the rent money into savings instead. That way we could save up for our wedding faster. With that in mind, we cut back on ski trips until we had enough saved up. Eventually, Tom and I both gained more work experience and felt like we could continue our jobs long term. We reached our savings goal. Thrilled that we could finally get married, we decided to meet each other's parents first. My parents live far away, so both of us would need to take time off to visit them. Inevitably, we ended up going to Tom's parents' place first. Actually, Tom had only recently told his parents about dating me. Apparently they're old-fashioned and believe unmarried couples should keep their relationship pure.
It's a very traditional area, so my parents don't approve of premarital relationships until the future is decided.
My hometown is rural too, so I get it. Times have changed, but it can't be helped.
That's why they think you and I are still living separately. If they ask, just go along with that.
We had this conversation and firmly swore to absolutely never reveal that we were already living together before heading to Tom's parents' house. Tom's family runs a small woodworking business, with a factory located next to their home. The factory was originally started by Tom's grandfather, and his father-in-law Dylan is now the second-generation owner. They employ a handful of skilled craftsmen who create custom furniture and interior decor pieces using locally sourced wood. Although it's a small operation, they have long-standing business relationships with companies dating back to Tom's grandfather's days, so while it's not an easy business, they seem to be doing relatively well compared to others in the same trade.
When I was a kid, Dad always told me, "Tom, you're going to take over as the boss one day, so start learning the ropes now." I was constantly made to help out at the factory. So when I decided to go to college, Dad wasn't happy about it.
Has Dylan decided who will take over the factory after him?
No, the craftsmen we have now are skilled but have zero interest in the business side of things. We've tried training younger workers, but no one sticks around long. I think Dad still hopes I'll come back and take over.
Do you have any intentions of coming back here in the future, Tom?
No way. I enjoy my current job that allows me to be involved with skiing. If I ever change careers, it would have to be something ski-related, or I definitely wouldn't last.
I was relieved to hear there was no chance of Tom taking over his family's factory. Inheriting the business would inevitably mean I'd be expected to support him and put down roots in that area too. I couldn't imagine living in an unfamiliar place, having to tiptoe around my seemingly old-fashioned parents-in-law. During that first visit to Tom's family home, I came face to face with Tom's parents, who would soon officially become my parents-in-law. We were shown to the living room where I deeply bowed my head to them.
I'm sure I have many shortcomings, but I will do my best to support Tom. I hope for your kind guidance for many years to come.
Yes, of course. I had pondered my words for days and even practiced, but my mother-in-law Caddy simply brushed them off. It was a bit anticlimactic. Still, at least Caddy had replied. Dylan stayed sullenly silent without a word, making me worried I had somehow angered him. But then Tom immediately started a normal conversation, so I figured these two must always be this distant.
By the way, Sophie, what do you do for work?
It was the first time Caddy properly spoke to me. I had expected her to ask about my upbringing or hometown at a time like this, so it threw me off that her first question was about my job. Nevertheless, I explained that I work an office job.
And about how much do you make annually?
She followed up, leaving me momentarily at a loss for words. Is that really something you suddenly ask your son's fiancé? Tom quickly interjected.
That's not something you ask so bluntly.
And warned his mother for me. But even after that, they peppered me with rather blatant questions at every turn, like the rent for the place I live now, and how much property and assets my parents own. Honestly, it was exhausting to field what felt like an interrogation into my and my family's financial situation. I snuck a glance at Tom beside me, who was sending me an apologetic look. Given that Tom's family has made their living running a factory for generations, perhaps they have very strict views about money. The barrage of questions earlier may have been their way of ascertaining whether I or any of my relatives are in debt. And if so, whether there was any risk of their son getting dragged into it. Maybe he wanted to confirm something like that. If they're just concerned about their son being suddenly saddled with a huge debt after marriage, I guess I can understand their perspective to some extent. At the time, I tried not to dwell on it too much. As soon as Caddy finished her spiel, Dylan opened his mouth as if he'd been waiting for his cue.
Well then, why don't you go ahead and take a tour of the factory right away?
His words caught me off guard. Just when I thought Dylan had finally deigned to speak to me, he's suggesting a factory tour out of the blue. Of course, it's his future son-in-law's family business, and I should probably have some idea of what it entails. But I can still hear the sound of machinery operating in the factory even now. Surely they don't expect me to go introduce myself to the employees on the spot like this, do they? The thought made me a bit nervous.
You don't have to remember everything all at once.
As Dylan started to stand up while saying this, Tim stopped him.
Both of you, cut it out already. We came today with the intention of just making introductions. There's no need to show her the factory, is there? Besides, what do you mean she doesn't have to remember it all at once? When she doesn't have to remember anything at all?
Chastened by Tim's forceful tone, Dylan reluctantly sat back down. Tim was absolutely right. It was clear from Dylan's choice of words that he was assuming I would eventually support Tim in taking over the factory. Apparently, Dylan still harbors hopes of having Tim inherit the business. At this point, I was starting to feel a very distinct sense of wariness towards these in-laws. Showing such blatant interest in my financial situation upon first meeting, and scheming from the start to tie me to the family factory that goes beyond just being tactless, in my opinion. This is a bit of an unbelievable situation. I understand that marrying Tim means inevitably being connected to these people. But I was realizing with stark clarity that having a close relationship with them in my daily life would be impossible. Sensing the increasingly tense atmosphere, Tim stepped in.
Any further discussion can wait until we meet again.
With that, he wrapped things up and we were done. As we were about to leave, Caddy was trying to tell Tim something in a low voice while walking with us. Tim was clearly exasperated as he dealt with her. And so, I was finally able to get away from Tim's family home. I found out later that Caddy's parting complaint to him were,
just because you're married doesn't mean you should become distant from your family. Make sure you think carefully and visit home.
It seemed like a pretty blatant guilt trip, but from Caddy's perspective, maybe she feels a sense of loneliness, as if I've stolen Tim away from her. But Tim seems exhausted by both Dylan pressuring him to take over the factory and Caddy constantly demanding excessive family time. He clearly has no desire to see them frequently. Of course, it's not like their relationship is hostile. Quirks aside, I'm sure Tim's parents act this way because they care about him. And Tim himself doesn't seem to want to stir up discord with them either. I wanted to respect Tim's feelings too. However, after talking to them for the first time today, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't handle a life with frequent meddling from those in-laws. I told Tim my honest feelings. I even conveyed that if there was any possibility of living with those two, it might make marriage itself difficult. Of course I love Tim, but I'm convinced that I'd be unable to maintain my peace of mind living together with those people.
My parents can be unintentionally overbearing with their opinions sometimes, so it's totally understandable that you feel that way, Sophie.
That's what Tim said.
I'm not considering ever living with them long term. And I absolutely won't let our lives get so intertwined that you end up dealing with their interference, Sophie.
He promised. I didn't want to reconsider my decision to get married, so I was truly relieved when he said that. However, even though we refrained from contacting them, my in-laws didn't do the same. Immediately after the greetings, my in-laws started making various proposals and demands to us. The most troublesome thing was their meddling in our wedding plans.
Tim is our only son and he's precious to us, so we want you to have the wedding in the way that has been passed down in this family for generations.
They kept insisting persistently. From an early stage, Tim and I had planned to have the wedding ceremony in a church and the reception as a small-scale event with only close relatives and friends. But Tim's parents even demanded that we hold the ceremony in their hometown. Furthermore, when they said we should make the reception bigger so they could invite many of their relatives, I felt anger welling up inside me. I don't want them interfering with our important ceremony. I told Tim that I wanted him to make them stop meddling any further. Of course, Tim felt the same way I did, but he looked pained being caught between his parents and me, so this time I decided to yield. Considering our life after marriage, I told my in-laws that we wanted to postpone the ceremony until we could save up a bit more money so we wouldn't use up all our savings on just the wedding, and smoothed things over for the moment. And so, our married life started while postponing the ceremony. I told my colleagues at work and friends that we decided to use the money for the reception on our daily life instead. Most of our acquaintances of the same generation agreed it was a more rational and better choice. For me, it was disappointing not being able to have a wedding ceremony, but I was very happy that we could officially submit the marriage registration and become husband and wife. And finally, our married life began. We were already living together, but living with a clear perspective on how we would overcome the rest of our lives together felt very fresh. And avoiding direct contact with my in-laws didn't cause anything in particular that made the relationship deteriorate. 2 years passed by in a flash, and I became pregnant with Tim's child and gave birth to a healthy baby boy without any issues. When I returned to my hospital room from the delivery room, Tim, who had been eagerly awaiting my son and I, walked up and held our child for the first time. I expected him to let out a cry of joy, but instead, doubtful words reached my ears as I finished giving birth.
His eyes are blue. Why? Is this child not mine?
I couldn't understand what he meant. Why was Tim glaring at me with such a grim expression? I tried to think with my still exhausted and dazed mind, but nothing came to mind.
What are you saying? That child is yours, Tim. What's wrong with his eyes? Look for yourself. His eyes are blue. Those aren't the eyes of our family. Since you undoubtedly gave birth to him, doesn't that mean he has a blue-eyed foreigner for a father? Are you saying I cheated on you? I absolutely never did such a thing. Then why are his eyes blue? Both of us have brown eyes. I've never heard of a blue-eyed child being born between two brown-eyed people.
I tried to say something in return, but a nurse who came running in surprise at the commotion intervened, and the situation settled down for the moment. After some time passed, I spoke with Tim again. Tim had regained his composure on the surface, but his eyes were still harsh as he looked at me. More than anything, he wouldn't even try to hold our son. He thought I had cheated on him with a blue-eyed man who wasn't him and gave birth to that man's child. I had absolutely never betrayed him like that. However, the fact was that our son's eyes were blue. I couldn't explain the reason why.
It's not that you can't explain, you just don't want to admit you cheated, right? Please believe me. There must be some way we can investigate this.
I somehow managed to say that, and just as it occurred to me that we could surely prove it if we had the genes tested, my in-laws burst into the hospital room.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Tim raised his voice in surprise. Tim shouldn't have told my in-laws that I had gone into labor, being considerate of how I wanted to avoid meeting them as much as possible. Of course, we couldn't not inform them of the birth, but we had intended to let them know after both the baby and I had fully settled down after the delivery.
I have an acquaintance among the nurses here.
And of course she knows about Tim, so she went out of her way to let us know that our grandchild was about to be born.
Not informing us of the birth of our first grandchild, what an unfilial son. Well, I guess I was kind of the same when you were born though.
The two of them had the biggest smiles on their faces that I had ever seen. You just had a baby, so why do you have such a displeased look on your face?
Yeah, the child was born healthy. But since I found out it's not mine, of course I'd have this kind of expression.
At the words Tim spat out, my in-laws exchanged glances with a look of incomprehension. Eventually, my mother-in-law peered at the baby's face and let out a loud voice.
It's true. This isn't Tim's child. Look at his eyes, he has blue eyes. What did you say?
My father-in-law, who had also shouted and stared at the baby.
You're right. His eyes are blue. I've never seen a child with eyes like that,
he said, turning back to face me. What is the meaning of this, Sophie? Were you planning on tricking Tim into raising some foreigner's child? What an appalling woman.
I thought you seemed rather distant when we met, but to think you had such intentions. That's not it. There must be some reason for this. I'm sure we'll understand if we investigate.
It was painful to have them hurl such heart-wrenching words at me one after another. But what hurt the most was that Tim, who should have been protecting me, was glaring at me together with my in-laws. A nurse, unable to bear watching my in-laws shouting in further agitation, calling me an adulterous woman and saying they'd make me pay compensation and divorce, ushered them out of the room. When she said she would call the police if they continued making a commotion and disturbing the mental stability of the patient, my in-laws finally withdrew quietly. I had fallen from the heights of being blessed with a son to the depths of despair. More than anything, the shock of being turned away by Tim, who should have been my greatest ally, left me unable to even shed tears and simply dumbfounded. After a while, my in-laws said,
"There's no point in looking at the face of someone else's child,"
and left. Tim sat silently with an air of not wanting to even look at the baby I was holding.
"I rushed out of the office because you went into labor, so what am I supposed to say when my colleagues congratulate me? Ugh."
I learned for the first time that Tim was capable of such cruelty. As I sat there unable to say anything more, Tim stood up.
"I'm not coming here anymore,"
he said coldly and tried to leave the room. Was this the end of my relationship with Tim and we would get divorced? The anxiety of whether this child would suddenly lose his father washed over me.
"Hey, wait! I know it's impossible to just ask you to believe me. So at least, before you end your relationship with me, please listen to one last request from me."
Hearing that, Tim reluctantly stopped in his tracks.
"Please ask the hospital to do a DNA test. The results should be available in about a week. If it determines he's not your child, then you can abandon me. You can even demand compensation. I haven't betrayed you. Even if we find out much later when the child grows up that he is yours, it will be too late to start over as father and son then."
My final plea seemed to reach Tim's heart, if only slightly. Tim said,
"Fine. That will make the truth clear,"
and left the room. After that, I wasn't in any state of mind to talk to anyone. I told the nurse that I couldn't see anyone else until my parents, whom I had contacted as soon as I went into labor, arrived, and had her refuse any visitors. That night, my parents, who had forcibly transferred trains to get there, rushed to the hospital barely in time for visiting hours. The moment I saw my parents' faces for the first time in a while, I shed tears of relief that someone had finally come who would be on my side.
"You did really well."
What happened to Tim? Has he not come yet? Asked that, I hesitated over whether to tell them what had happened here until then. But I had nothing to be ashamed of, and I thought that if the results of the upcoming test came out, my relationship with Tim could be repaired, so I decided to keep quiet to avoid giving my parents unnecessary worry. I made the painful excuse that Tim had been with me until just before, but he had to go back to the office for a bit because there was some work he absolutely had to do himself. And my mother Lenore gently held my son, whom neither Tim nor my in-laws had held, and peered at his face. What kind of reaction would Lenore have upon seeing his blue eyes? If she reacted the same way as Tim and the others? Thinking that, I couldn't look at Lenore's face and inadvertently lowered my head.
"Oh, how adorable. His features take after Tim, don't they? Let me see. Oh, you're right. But the shape of his nose resembles Sophie."
My father Sullivan also looked happy. It was a very ordinary reaction for grandparents seeing their first grandchild, but their response full of joy made me truly happy from the bottom of my heart.
"Look, this child has blue eyes too. Just like when Sophie was born."
I reflexively raised my head.
"What?"
and let out a surprised. My eyes met those of my parents, who were smiling with faces full of affection. My eyes were blue when I was born too.
"That's right. Oh, did we never tell you?"
It wasn't that uncommon among our relatives. We probably didn't think it was worth mentioning. Wondering what on earth they were talking about, I asked for a more detailed explanation. My mother didn't have particularly detailed knowledge, but apparently my father had heard a more in-depth explanation from a doctor friend of his, so he explained it to me. Even if a person was born with blue eyes, there are cases where the color changes due to genetics. The frequency tends to be higher in the South when looking nationwide, and it's known that the area where I was born has an especially high tendency for that. And it's also apparently quite common for eyes that were blue to gradually approach the level of brown as the child grows. I was a child who fit that exact case. Indeed, I had been told a few times before that my eye color looked lighter. My eye color probably looks a bit lighter than other people's because what were originally blue eyes gradually turned brown. But since this wasn't an unusual story where I'm from, it seems my parents never mentioned it to me after I grew up. However, my mother said she must have told me about it a few times when I was little. If that's true, I may have just let it go in one ear and out the other. But I didn't care about such minor details. Knowing the reason why I had a blue-eyed child and that I could properly explain it to Tim now, the tears I had been holding back started flowing out. My parents, surprised by my sudden crying, held my shoulders in bewilderment. For a while, I just indulged in that sensation and continued crying. During that time, my son stayed cradled in my mother's arms, breathing peacefully in his sleep. Eventually, when my parents heard from me about what had just happened, they became furious. I had never seen my parents display such intense anger before. My parents immediately tried to call Tim, who had gone home earlier, to come back. But since visiting hours were almost over, they said they would meet Tim outside and left the hospital room. I heard later that my father had expressed his tremendous anger to Tim, saying,
"How could you not believe your wife's story at all, not even hold the baby, and go home like that?"
And Tim had been thoroughly contrite. He told Tim about the area where I was born and raised, about the mechanism behind the different eye color. He apparently even sent Tim photos of neighborhood children with blue eyes to show him. And Tim was apparently convinced by that. I was told that if my mother hadn't intervened at the end, my father looked ready to punch Tim. Hearing that Tim had apologized with tears in his eyes, saying he was truly sorry, I felt my intense anger towards him abate slightly. The next day, Tim took an emergency day off work and rushed to my hospital room first thing in the morning to apologize for his words and actions yesterday. "I'm sorry. I had this preconceived notion that if both parents have brown eyes, the child will always be born with brown eyes too. I judged based solely on the bias that a child's eyes can't be blue unless one of the parents has blue eyes."
It's okay. I didn't know that my eyes were blue when I was little either. Or rather, I didn't remember. And the DNA test results aren't back yet, so right now I'm just happy you believe this story.
Tim promised to take responsibility for clearing up his parents' misunderstanding himself, and vowed not to create any more opportunities for me to come face to face with them in the future. Later, Tim called his parents home, but when that didn't work, he apparently ended up going directly to their house to explain the situation. However, it seems that even so, his parents wouldn't abandon their suspicion towards me. They stubbornly insisted that we still couldn't know until the DNA test results came back, and even criticized Tim for discarding his doubts so quickly. But this time, Tim had also looked into and come to understand that there was a possibility of blue-eyed children being born even from brown-eyed parents, and had come to believe in my innocence. However, no matter how much Tim explained those things, his parents wouldn't listen at all. On the contrary, they insulted us, saying we were just putting on an act and even getting the neighbors involved. They even went so far as to say that if Tim broke up with me and took over the factory soon, they would find him a better woman. Tim finally exploded in anger at their utter lack of obedience.
"If you two continue to insult Sophie like this, I'm cutting ties with you."
And apparently stormed out, saying so. And about a week passed. Our son had no health issues whatsoever, and by then I had completely recovered from the initial uproar. And on the day I was discharged from the hospital with our son, the DNA test results arrived. Tim, who had purposely brought the unopened results all the way from home to my hospital room, opened the envelope in front of me. It stated that a high enough match rate to definitively say the baby was mine and Tim's child had been confirmed. Tim stared long and hard at the test results, and finally bowed his head deeply to me and said, "I'm truly sorry." I couldn't completely forgive him with just this apology after he had hurled such verbal abuse at me. But Tim had been convinced until that moment that a child inherits the eye color of either the father or mother. But I had thought the same thing. If the child born looked nothing like one's own at a glance, perhaps one would get flustered like that. Thinking that, I couldn't bring myself to say we should divorce. Tim, who apologized to me many times over, said he would tell his parents about these results and left the house. I didn't want to have any contact with his parents in any form, so I even thought it would be fine not telling them at all.
If we leave this misunderstanding as is, my parents might scheme something to make us divorce using this as a reason. They're already spreading rumors to the neighbors. So I have to properly convey the facts to them.
Hearing Tim say that, I decided to leave his parents to Tim and not think about it at all. Eventually, Tim returned after finishing the phone call and said with a relieved expression,
I explained it to them properly. Just in case, I also took a photo of the test results and emailed it to them. I told them I'm not going to visit them in the future and asked them not to come see us either.
With those words, I could feel that all my connections to his parents had vanished. However, as I was preparing to be discharged and going through the procedures for billing and such, his parents showed up. After that phone call, they had immediately hailed a taxi and rushed over. I heard Tim,
I told them not to come,
who was carrying our luggage, mutter,
Sophie, I heard it's been proven the baby is Tim's son. That's great. Now everything can be smoothed over. Yeah, and it's a boy too. Thank you for giving birth to a healthy heir.
I was speechless. There's an expression to flip-flop on someone, but this wasn't like that at all. It was as if they had flipped the heavens and earth with how drastically their attitude had changed. Could it be the same mouths saying these words that had cursed me as an adulteress?
Take this chance to divorce her and get compensation money.
And hurled insults at me just days ago. As I stood there dumbfounded, Tim, who had been standing in front of me, dropped his shoulders and crouched down on the spot. Tim apparently felt so deflated he couldn't stand at the sight of his parents' utterly self-centered behavior. As if not to miss that chance, my mother-in-law slipped past Tim and approached right in front of me.
Here, let me hold him.
I instinctively drew back from my mother-in-law, who was extending both hands. Then even my father-in-law approached. You too, as the child grows bigger your place will likely get too cramped, so you can come live with us. Luckily we have plenty of land, so we can even add on to the house. The grandchild will probably be happier with more liveliness too. I felt slightly dizzy. To think they'd even suggest living together. Perhaps they have no sense of shame. Staying with these people any longer would likely impede my postpartum recovery. But I didn't want to line up my words here and argue back either. No matter what I said, my father-in-law probably wouldn't listen, and more than anything, I didn't want to let my newborn son hear my angry voice. I brushed away my mother-in-law's hands that persistently kept reaching out trying to hold my son, approached the taxi they had arrived in, and conveyed my intention to get in with my gaze. Tim, who had been standing there dumbfounded, noticed my desire to leave this place as soon as possible and helped me get in, pushing aside his parents who were standing there stunned at being blatantly ignored.
Hurry and go!
Tim also got in and told the driver. The taxi immediately drove off, leaving the hospital behind. For a moment, I saw the side of his dumbfounded parents seeing us off reflected in the side mirror, but I never looked back again. Later, Tim reluctantly answered one of the several calls that came in from his parents. In a cold voice, Tim told his parents on the other end of the line that he was cutting ties with them.
I want Dad and Mom to have absolutely no involvement in our lives anymore. To not even apologize to Sophie and suggest living together is unthinkable as human beings. I won't let either of you see Sophie or our son at all. Please don't think of our son as your grandchild. I'll never let you two meet him, so give up.
Saying that, he hung up and immediately did something on his mobile phone before putting it away. After that, no more calls came in, so I assumed he had blocked their numbers, but Tim told me without saying anything unnecessary that we would never be bothered about this matter again. However, knowing his parents, no matter how strongly Tim declared he was cutting ties with them, in the end they might even show up at our apartment. But even if his parents took such actions, I knew I no longer had to worry about anything. Actually, a little before our son was born, Tim had gotten a job as a ski resort manager through an introduction from an acquaintance. Tim had been so eager to work in a job related to skiing that he had specifically chosen to work at a sports equipment company. So when he received word of this position,
I definitely want to do it.
He was overjoyed and had replied. That place was in my hometown, where my parents also live. For me too, this job offer had the best possible conditions. If possible, I had wanted to give birth at a hospital there, but by the time this job change was decided, my due date was fast approaching. Transferring to a different hospital suddenly during this time was high risk, and more than anything, there were few hospitals that handled deliveries there, and they were all full with local pregnant women. So in that case, we had decided I would give birth at the hospital here where I had been receiving regular checkups from the beginning. That was the situation, so we had decided to wait until our son was old enough for long-distance travel and move the whole family together. We finished relocating our base of living while keeping this move and job change hidden from Tim's parents until the very end. By the time a month had passed since our son was born, everything was over. Fortunately, our son grew up healthy in both mind and body, and no issues arose at all during the long-distance move. In the end, during the time it took for us to finish moving like that, his parents never showed up at our apartment. Several years have passed since then, but an opportunity to have contact with his parents has yet to come. Our son, who is now running around energetically, continues to grow up without even knowing of his grandparents' existence. At one point, I had a chance to talk with an acquaintance living near his parents' house, and they told me about the recent state of affairs around that factory. After we suddenly cut off contact, not only were they unable to see their grandson, but even their only son Tim avoided them, and apparently this caused both his parents to completely lose their energy. Perhaps because Dylan's vigor had declined, he was unable to turn around the factory's performance that had been on a downward trend, and he apparently decided on his own to shut it down. The factory that Dylan had been so eager to have Tim take over and even pass on to his grandchild no longer exists. The acquaintance had seen my mother-in-law Caddy out shopping a few times, but said she seemed lifeless. Eventually Caddy injured her leg and it impeded her mobility, and she apparently became unable to even do housework satisfactorily. Dylan, who had no life skills and had never even done his own laundry, was apparently seen by people many times wearing terribly dirty clothes. And now, it seems both that house and factory are deserted and have become completely vacant. This is just my guess, but I think the two of them, having lost their ability to live on their own, were probably taken into a facility for elderly support or something similar by the government. Of course, I have no intention of going out of my way to confirm their whereabouts. And we, the husband and wife who became ski resort managers, are working hard at our jobs every day in the dreamlike environment of working at the ski resort we love. Since it's an environment where we can visit my parents' home with just a little travel, we go back and forth and help each other out when needed. My parents come over all the time, making up various excuses because they want to see their grandson even when they don't really need help. Our son is very attached to my parents too and really looks forward to seeing them. Having frequently gone to the ski resort from the time he gained awareness, our son is naturally showing an interest in skiing. He's already imitating skiing form and making us and my parents smile. Once this child grows up enough to be able to ski, the day will surely come when we can all ski together as a family. I can hardly wait for that day to arrive.
I'm pregnant.
Suddenly, that's what Barbara, who claims to be my best friend and a colleague, told me. She said the father is my fiancé. I, who felt out of place and burdened at work because my fiancé was taken by an incompetent woman, ended up resigning. Little did I dream that a great reversal in life awaited me. My name is Sandra, and I'm 28 years old. I work in the cartoon section of a publishing house. It's odd to say this about myself, but I am fairly competent. I handle 3 cartoon artists. One is a hit maker who's a star of the magazine, another is a veteran with enthusiastic fans. And the last one is a promising newcomer who seems capable of carrying the magazine's future. They all trust me with their manuscripts. The basic job of an editor is to assist the cartoon artists under their charge and ensure the manuscripts are finished by the deadline. This includes gathering materials, delivering them to the workplace, bringing refreshments to encourage the assistants, and sometimes brainstorming ideas together. Being a cartoon artist means creating worlds with just a pen and giving dreams and hope to the readers, I believe. Actually, I used to draw cartoon during my student days. I had a dream of becoming a cartoon artist, but realizing I lacked the talent, I decided to help bring cartoon to the world by becoming an editor. Sandra really loves cartoon, says Donald, my colleague and boyfriend. We've been dating for about 2 years now, and we're talking about getting married soon, so he's practically my fiancé. It's not a job where sitting from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is enough if a cartoon artist I'm in charge of contacts me. I often have to rush over outside of normal hours, so it's hard to match schedules with regular office workers. That's why dating Donald, who's also in editing, is convenient. Though it's tough to find time for dates.
Sandra is lucky with her charges.
That's Barbara speaking, another colleague from the same batch. She used to edit for a girls' cartoon magazine at the same publisher. But after being disliked by a female cartoon artist she was in charge of, she had to change departments. While it's true that cartoon artists can be difficult or eccentric, in this case, I think Barbara was the problem. She's often late, full of excuses, and quick to blame others. Still, because she looks cute and seems modest and quiet, it was suggested that she might do better handling male cartoon artists for a boys' magazine rather than female ones for a girls' magazine. Which is how she ended up in my department under circumstances that might be frowned upon nowadays. Maybe I'm lucky, but I also put in the effort. I want to help create good cartoon. Barbara, do you even know the food preferences and hobbies of the cartoon artists you handle?
But I bring them trendy sweets and stuff.
It's not about what's trendy. You need to bring what they actually like. Some people don't like sweets, you know.
Even though I lined up to buy it, I get told, I've mentioned before I don't like sweets, haven't I?
Let me guess, you bought that Mont Blanc the other day because you wanted it yourself. And just picked up something extra for the cartoon artist? Prioritizing yourself over your charge, what's that about?
That's fine, isn't it, just this once?
Not fine at all. Buying what you want and then just getting something extra as a courtesy. And then using that as an excuse to line up during work hours.
Well, not everyone is as passionate about their work as Sandra. I wish I had a cute girl like Barbara to handle.
Someone said, making me feel down. Donald. I didn't like their unserious attitude towards work. Yet, since they were the only batch mates I could speak openly with, we often went out for drinks. Barbara prefers older men. She says her boyfriend is almost 20 years her senior.
I lost my dad when I was little, so I guess I'm drawn to older men. They're kind and calm, and I don't get girls who date guys their own age. Hey. Saying that in front of us, a couple of the same age?
Barbara knows that Donald and I are dating. I can't imagine being with someone 20 years older. When I'm 50, he'll be 70. That's like a grandpa. We joked around like this, somewhere relieved that Barbara wouldn't become a love rival. One day, when I was meeting Donald for a date, Barbara called, saying she was feeling unwell and asked if I could pick up a manuscript in her place. I could have refused, but the cartoon artist Barbara was handling was actually someone I'd been personally supporting since their debut. Paul is a mid-30s male comic artist with talent but hasn't been blessed with a hit series. I had to cancel my date with Donald to pick up the manuscript. Ah? You must be Sandra, right? What happened to your usual person? I was happy that he remembered my name even though I had never handled his work before.
Barbara is unwell, so I came to pick up the manuscript instead.
Ah, she often seems to be in poor health, doesn't she? Is she frail? Is she okay? I had never heard that she was physically weak. It seems there are times she's refused requests using her poor health as an excuse. Hearing stories about messed up autograph session arrangements. Her bringing a fan letter that arrived 6 months ago, or bringing an apple pie for Paul despite his apple allergy made me frustrated. The other day, I asked for photos for reference, and she emailed me blurry photos found on the internet. If that were enough, I wouldn't have bothered asking. The teacher sighed. I apologized on behalf of her and promised to give her a stern warning.
Is my comic unpopular because it's not that great?
He said something so sad.
I've been a fan since your debut work. I even buy your books and line them up on my bookshelf.
To which I confessed. Paul was delighted and said,
Really? Then I'll draw your favorite character for you.
And he carefully drew my favorite character in my notebook. I was so happy I forgot my anger at Barbara.
But she's so analog these days, wants analog materials, and it's weird she sends fan letters by mail.
When I firmly scolded her, she didn't reflect but insisted she was not to blame.
There are still many people who prefer analog. There are plenty of fans who handwrite letters filled with their feelings. Don't just do your job carelessly because you find it troublesome. What? Sandra, you're kinda scary. What we do is support comic artists to produce good work. Bringing them food they're allergic to or otherwise hindering them is actually harmful, not helpful. But I didn't know that. Can't be helped, right?
That was a lie. Paul had said he informed her clearly. Then Donald arrived and joined the conversation.
What's going on here? Some kind of fight? Donald. Sandra's being really harsh.
She whimpered to him with a voice pretending to cry, but without any tears.
Barbara, did you make a careless mistake again? It's not about being careless. I'm talking about an attitude towards work. We don't need an editor who troubles the comic artists. Hey! That's too much. Don't judge people by your own standards.
I never thought my fiancé would take her side. Looking back, I think this was when our relationship began to deteriorate. Our views on work and our priorities were different. I should have ended things quickly, but perhaps I still had feelings or thought it could be fixed, so I couldn't let go of Donald. Afterwards, Barbara was removed from handling Paul's work. Because Paul had asked the editor-in-chief if his editor could be changed, but out of misplaced consideration. They didn't tell Barbara the truth, so she believed I had snitched on her to the editor-in-chief.
How awful! Snitching to the editor-in-chief. I just warned you. I didn't snitch. Why am I being replaced then? That you're taking over proves it.
Indeed. Paul had requested the editor-in-chief for me to take over if possible. While this was very pleasing, it only fueled Barbara's belief that I was responsible for her being replaced. The thought of managing 4 comic artists seemed daunting, so after consulting with the editor-in-chief, we decided to let Barbara handle a hitmaker cartoon artist. This artist works in a production style, with plenty of staff to gather materials and handle events, and never misses a deadline. Basically, what an editor does is go to pick up manuscripts and bring refreshments. So I thought there wouldn't be any trouble with Barbara taking over. Barbara seemed pleased, saying,
Actually, it might have been a stroke of luck. Paul isn't very well known, and many of my friends don't even recognize his name. But from now on, everyone will know who I'm talking about.
This made me quite angry, even though she seemed to have forgotten her anger towards me.
I'm sorry if my request to the editor-in-chief caused trouble with your colleagues,
Paul said to me the first time I showed up at his workplace. I don't know how the word got out, but such news spreads quickly. No problem. I'm happy to be assigned. I'll work hard to make up for all the trouble Barbara caused. Please let me know if there's anything you need. When I say that.
Thank you. I'm sorry to bother you so quickly, but could you please find me an assistant? I asked Barbara a long time ago.
I said, thinking it's unbelievable how little work she did. I arranged for someone who could draw in Paul's style and wouldn't disturb the workplace atmosphere too much. since he is single and meals during work mostly consist of delivery, including for the assistants. I arranged for someone to prepare meals, and I also cooked when I visited. With no manager to handle day-to-day tasks, I took on as many of those duties as I could.
It's a huge help. You get perfect materials when I ask, and I've gotten much more time to draw.
I was pleased to be appreciated. Originally, Paul's work, while not flashy, had a unique worldview and humor, garnering many passionate fans. I'm one of them, but I think he must have struggled a lot, wanting to spend more time on his art but being bogged down by miscellaneous duties and lacking assistance. Perhaps because he now had more time and mental space. The popularity of his ongoing series began to rise, and I was praised by the editor-in-chief. Then one day, Donald said he wanted to talk and asked me out to dinner. Maybe it was about marriage. Or perhaps a breakup. Either way, I felt it was time to clarify things. However, when I arrived at the restaurant we had arranged, Donald and Barbara were sitting together, side by side, not opposite each other. Feeling something was off, I sat down across from them.
Sandra, I'm pregnant,
Barbara said as soon as I took my seat.
Huh? It's Donald's child. What about the older guy you were dating? Ugh, we broke up a long time ago.
Barbara leaned into Donald, who was sitting beside her.
But I thought you weren't interested in guys your own age. That was true, but love doesn't need a reason. Huh?
Then Donald spoke.
I want to start a family with her. So do it?
Huh?
If you want to be a family or whatever, go ahead. If that's all, I'm leaving.
As I got up to leave.
Wait! I feel bad about this.
Sorry, Sandra. They both said. Barbara's smug face at that moment made me incredibly angry.
It's fine. You two suit each other,
Donald then said with a downcast look.
I got tired of you acting superior just because you're good at your job.
I didn't intend to, but that's how he felt.
I wasn't looking down on you. It's just a difference in how we view work. That's why you two are a good match.
I left the restaurant with those words. I didn't feel sad. There was frustration, but it was more about losing to Barbara than about losing a fiancé I loved. I should have initiated the breakup sooner. Thinking of Barbara's triumphant face made me feel terrible. It seems she intends to continue working even after getting married. While our editorial department doesn't interfere in personal matters, almost everyone knew about my relationship with Donald. And suddenly, the couple had changed. Everyone loves a good scandal, and all sorts of speculation were flying around. I became famously known as the woman whose fiancé was stolen by her supposed best friend. I don't recall ever becoming best friends with Barbara, but she must have been spreading lies about it. I knew he was my best friend's boyfriend, but I fell in love anyway. I can't help it. She seemed to have cried, casting herself as the tragic heroine. But it wasn't just Barbara. Donald too. Sandra's treatment of Barbara was terrible. Watching that made me drift away from her, and I felt I had to protect her. Apparently, I was the bad guy, the so-called best friend. According to them, I harassed Barbara at work, took away the comic artist she was in charge of, and drove my fiancé away. Though I think those who know my work ethic didn't believe even half of it, I felt uncomfortable nonetheless. And I had to face those two every day.
Sandra, I'll give you an invitation to our wedding. You'll attend as a colleague, won't you?
When Barbara handed me the invitation, I decided to quit. I won't be your colleague anymore, so I won't attend. With that, I submitted my resignation letter to Charles, the editor-in-chief. Charles tried to persuade me to stay, suggesting we talk in a private room.
I love this job and I adore the comic artists I work with. But it's too painful to continue working here under these circumstances.
Then Charles said to me, "Honestly, it's more of a problem if you quit than if those two do. Would you reconsider?" Obviously, those two weren't highly regarded.
Thank you for your kind words, but I need some time to relax my mind and body.
I refused, and proceeded to inform the comic artists I was handling about my resignation, bringing them refreshments. They were all sorry to see me go, and some even said they wanted to work with me again if I switched to another publisher after their current series ended. Paul, thinking he was the reason for my resignation, apologized more than was necessary, making me feel guilty.
I was also delighted to work with you, Paul. It's a real shame.
I genuinely felt that way, wishing I could have helped more as his popularity was on the rise. Then, Paul said, If you haven't decided on your next job yet, would you consider, if you're okay with it, doing something like being my manager?"
What?
"Since you took over, it's been much easier to work, and I've gotten used to it. I think I can't manage without you. I can pay you the same amount you're earning now." "Ah, but if you were earning a lot, maybe I can't afford it." His proposal was hesitant but heartfelt. And since he was a comic artist I greatly admired.
"I'd be delighted. If you're okay with me, I'd love to help out."
And so, I became his manager. My salary turned out to be much less than Paul had feared, so there was no issue. Paul might seem laid back, but he never compromises on his cartoon. Working together, his love for cartoon and his own creations became even more apparent, and I grew to like him even more. The person who took over my role was a male colleague I had helped when I was new, surprised to learn I had become a manager. He mentioned understanding why Paul's work had been going so well lately. He said he wouldn't say anything, but eventually, my former company would find out I was working with Paul. I knew that, it's a small industry, but I didn't mind. My only concern was to continue creating great work with Paul. One day, he said excitedly, "Hey, Sandra. Recently, the female characters in my cartoon have been gaining popularity. It's thanks to you. You gave me a lot of advice." I had thought his male characters were fantastic, but his females lacked a bit of flair. I really don't get women's psychology at all, so it's been a huge help. This character acting cute on purpose. I thought she was annoying, but it's fun to draw her, and she's surprisingly popular. It might be thrilling in a cartoon, but having someone like that around in real life is awful. That character, Barbara, was the model for her, right? I said, and Paul. Really? I see her, huh? Laughed like a child. This girl character is based on Sandra, right? No, not at all. I'm not that cool. She's more like an ideal woman. Really? I've always thought this character resembles you and is wonderful. That's why I put a lot of effort into drawing her. I was happy to know he saw me that way, and it felt almost like a confession. Does that mean you think I'm wonderful? Did I say something like that? Oh, I did. Sorry, that's creepy, isn't it? He apologized, looking downcast, which I found endearing. Not at all. I love your cartoon, but I also admire and love everything about your work ethic and you. Paul might look geeky, but to me, he was infinitely more wonderful than Donald ever was. Book sales were booming, and an anime adaptation had been decided. The media coverage and interviews increased. As a manager, these were happy problems to have. I had almost forgotten about Donald and Barbara, but I had business at the editorial office. Right, those two got married. Thinking this, I went to the editorial office and saw Barbara, noticeably pregnant.
Ah, long time no see.
I greeted her cheerily, but she just glanced at me and walked away. After handing over some legal documents to the editor-in-chief and being invited, we moved to the cafe. It's been tough since you left. The editor-in-chief sighed. The hitmaker comic artist Barbara was handling got furious.
What? The one who's supposed to be stable no matter who handles him?
I was surprised. It turns out she upset him by asking, "Why don't you switch to digital drawing? Everyone's doing it these days." Regarding the few tasks she had, like picking up manuscripts and bringing refreshments. I've apologized many times, and now I'm handling him. Barbara is sorting documents, but even that's not going well. But you can't fire someone just because they're incompetent at their job. She's all set to take maternity leave and parental leave. Charles sighed again. Donald's reputation isn't great either. I had him take over the veteran comic artists you were managing, but everyone compares him to you, saying he's not as considerate or fast. I keep getting complaints, he said, looking dejected. I felt sorry for him, but there was nothing I could do. I was relieved to hear that the newcomers were being handled by capable people. On my way out, I passed by the document room and saw the two of them talking, obviously not working. Not working after all. Donald noticed me.
Long time no see. You're doing well, aren't you?
And said with a defeated look.
Yes, I am. With the anime and possibly a game adaptation, it's busy but fulfilling.
I smiled, and he clicked his tongue. I couldn't believe I was once engaged to such a man.
Oh, by the way, I'm getting married to Paul. I'll be supporting him as a manager and a partner from now on. No way. He's been making a lot of money recently.
Barbara reacted to that, which was disappointing. Neither of them had a word of congratulations to offer. To top it off,
"It's unfair that you got to manage him after me,"
she complained nonsensically. So, I decided to tell a lie.
"Yeah. We're planning a grand wedding and honeymoon around the world. And we're thinking of buying a high-rise condominium for our new home."
I showed them a ring with a large gemstone. The ring was the only truth, the rest was made up on the spot. Though it wasn't impossible to make it happen. Seeing Barbara's deeply frustrated face was satisfying.
"Paul's just a geeky guy, right?"
Donald said, trying to save face. He really is a petty man.
"He's a talented and wonderful person, worth dozens of you."
That's the truth.
"Well then. I wish you both happiness,"
I said and walked away, hearing them argue behind me. Afterward, Barbara was apparently sued by the wife of the older man she used to date, demanding compensation. It seemed he wasn't single after all. Donald was saying the baby might not be his, but it's uncertain until the birth. They were already looked down upon for their lack of competence and motivation. And with this scandal becoming known, I wondered if even they would find it hard to stay at the company. But considering their shamelessness, it's hard to say. Either way, I can't imagine a bright and joyful future awaiting them.
A lavish wedding, a reception, a trip around the world, and a high-rise condominium, huh? Shall we make it all happen?
Paul said, laughing after hearing my story.
You're not one for showy public displays, right? The idea of traveling the world is tempting, but it would mean taking a long break from the series, and I don't want to disappoint the readers. I don't care where we live. All right. Then, once this series ends, let's take a super long vacation and travel the world. Let's. And we'll take lots of photos for reference. You really are the ideal editor. But from now on, it's okay to be a more selfish wife.
Paul says. Just imagining the world with cartoon makes me happy, but becoming any happier might just ruin me.
It's like a miracle. Ah, wait. It's dirty, let me clean it up for you. Huh?
As soon as I turned around at the incomprehensible words, I felt a cold shock on my face and crumbled to the ground. The stain on my moss green party dress slowly spread.
What's this? Water and flowers?
Looking up, my sister-in-law Isabella, adorned in a beautiful dress, was holding a vase that had been on the table. Water was dripping from the vase.
A dirty woman is clean now.
Isabella said this with a truly joyful look, sporting an ugly, mean smile. My name is Heather, 35 years old. I work as a housewife and in caregiving. My husband Kyle, who is the same age as me, was a high school classmate again and a high school reunion. Starting from friendship, his confession led us to dating and smoothly to marriage. Although we don't have children, we live a happy life. However, the relationship with my in-laws' house could not be said to be good. For some reason, Isabella, my sister-in-law who is 6 years younger than me, has been hostile towards me since the beginning of our marriage.
Could you not touch various things with hands that have changed drool-covered elders' diapers? It's unclean. Doing a job smeared in filth, earning less than half of what I make. Seems like the bill has come due for not studying properly.
I've been told things like this too many times since getting married. It's true that caregiving involves dealing with filth and is hard for the pay. But there is fulfillment, and there are joys in interacting with the people and their families using the facility. I still remember. Before we were married, at the facility I worked at, there was a very sweet and lovely grandmother with advanced dementia. It was tough to care for her, but she was very kind. Everyone called her Lovely Grandma, and she passed away from old age. Later, her family came to pick up her belongings and told me. When we first came here, honestly, our whole family was nearly at its limit. My grandmother, who had always been loving towards me, had forgotten even me, and needed care. But, being taken care of here gave us all breathing space, and we were able to cherish Mom like before. It's thanks to you all that we could love Grandma to the end. I'm glad we met you. Thank you. Hearing this from the grandson, his son, and wife, I ended up crying with them. At that time, I was struggling with whether caregiving was right for me and had thought about quitting. However, those words made all the hardship worth it and became the reason I continued in the job. Thanks to experiences like that, I now take pride in my work. Yet, being spoken to in such a manner by Isabella, who knows nothing about caregiving, was infuriating. Do you even realize how rude you're being? She works hard every day for her family. You, who don't even have a family, have no right to mock her. Fortunately, Kyle has always defended me whenever Isabella said something, but each time, she would counter with a displeased attitude.
Look, Kyle. It's only kids who think just trying hard is enough. And the thought of hands that have touched the filth of strangers elderly doing my cooking or whatever makes me sick. After all, caregiving is something you end up having to do when your parents get old, no matter how much you don't want to. To call something anyone can do a job. It's laughable.
Kyle and I were both appalled by her words. Leonard and Karen just looked on indifferently, as if it had nothing to do with them. According to Kyle, they truly believe that what Isabella, more accomplished than them with just a high school diploma, says is right. Without reprimand or reproach, they seemed unmoved no matter how much Kyle spoke up. Originally, Isabella was the long-awaited daughter born late in her parents' lives. Growing up spoiled due to her intelligence and beautiful features. By the time she graduated from a prestigious university and secured a job at a multinational corporation, she had become the top of the hierarchy in the in-laws' house. Both parents adopted an Isabella first mentality. Now, Isabella's words and actions are always prioritized, with only her older brother, Kyle, daring to speak against her. However, her average brother, who graduated from a regular university and works at a small to medium enterprise, might as well be speaking to a wall for all the attention she pays him. It seems his words never reach her. The in-laws' house has never been a comfortable place for either Kyle or me, but we've decided to manage by only visiting a few times a year. Regardless of the situation at the in-laws' house, my husband and I have a great relationship. Just as I love Kyle, he treasures me above all else. To me, he is the perfect husband. Then one day, we received an unexpected piece of news. Isabella was getting married. And she wanted to wear her dress before turning 30, so the wedding was happening sooner rather than later. According to Leonard and Karen, the groom is a very decent young man who works for the city hall. Plus, his parents are civil servants, they own a house in the city, and he has an older brother who is already married. Indeed, a match without fault. No worries about layoffs, and owning a house in the city means wealth. I had to admire such flawlessness. Surprised by the sudden good news, Kyle and I decided to sincerely congratulate them. And before we knew it, the day of the ceremony arrived. The weather was clear. It was a refreshingly beautiful day. Having not attended a wedding in a while, and considering the venue was a luxury hotel, I put extra effort into my makeup and wore my moss green party dress, twirling in front of Kyle. "How do I look?"
Yeah. You look beautiful.
Smiling at Kyle's words, I couldn't help but beam. In the end, we had never met the fiancé. Today would be the first encounter. Although I had my thoughts about Isabella's fiancé, today was a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, and I wanted to wish the couple well. Then, Kyle's smartphone vibrated.
Hello? I understand. What, really? Got it, we're on our way.
Kyle hung up the phone abruptly and announced in a panic.
We're late. The family introduction is starting soon. What?
We looked at the invitation again. I recalled that for our wedding, we had sent a separate card asking relatives to come early. But no matter how many times I checked, there was no such card included. Isabella's smug smile flashed through my mind. By the time we hurriedly arrived at the hotel, the family meet and greet had already ended, and everyone was moving around freely. The hall, doubling as a guest room, was crowded with many other guests. We rushed over to Leonard and Karen, who looked displeased. Our apologies met with a stern glare from my father-in-law, Leonard.
What were you thinking, being late on such an important day?
We're sorry for being late. But we didn't receive any notice to come early. Look. Kyle showed the invitation to Leonard, who just shook his head.
There's no way she would make such a mistake. Maybe you lost it?
That's not. Kyle, at a loss for words, was quietly told by Karen. We'll have someone tell you later. Make sure to greet everyone before the party starts. It wouldn't be right for her. Perhaps not wanting to argue at such a joyous occasion. Kyle seemed to swallow his words, accepting Karen's. The mood between us was complex. Let's go freshen up in the bathroom while we can.
Yes, let's.
At Kyle's suggestion, I nodded. The hurry had disheveled our hair and clothes. Hoping for a mood change, we headed to the restroom, and on the way back, I caught sight of Isabella in her wedding dress.
Isabella.
Despite coming with congratulations in my heart, I couldn't participate in the party comfortably without addressing this. I called out to her impulsively. She looked at me with utter annoyance and said,
Hey, why did you come?
What? What does she mean? It's natural for me to come since I received an invitation. Confused by her inexplicable remark, I forgot what I wanted to ask. Watching me, she appraised me in the deserted hallway.
You're completely out of place.
I had no idea what she was talking about. I was dressed appropriately for the occasion, and while I might have been disheveled earlier, I had since tidied myself up. I didn't think I stood out as particularly out of place. Isabella continued.
I thought someone who cleans up elderly people's messes for a meager salary would be too embarrassed to show up. Or did you come because you rarely get to visit such places and couldn't resist the opportunity?
Irritated by Isabella's words, I held back, knowing that causing a scene would only trouble Kyle. I always wonder, why do you talk like that? I came because I was invited and wanted to offer my congratulations. Besides, there are elderly guests here, too. It's not very nice to speak like that.
Huh? You, of all people, think you can talk back to me?
Isabella frowned in displeasure at my attempt to respond calmly.
A below-average man for a husband, childless. And satisfied with a dirty job that pays peanuts. A loser lecturing me? Don't make me laugh.
It's you who's been insulting from the start. Anger bubbled up inside me. Just as I was about to yell back, Kyle called my name from behind. Startled, I stopped, and Isabella snickered.
Today is my big day. Try not to ruin it, okay?
Then, she left with a staff member. Left alone, Kyle hurried over, looking concerned. What happened? Is everything okay?
It's the same as always. I'm fine, really.
I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady, but it trembled. Kyle seemed to sense something and silently put his arm around me. Honestly, I couldn't care less about Isabella's wedding. But causing trouble now would affect many others, not just Isabella. I decided to endure it just for today. Swallowing everything I wanted to say, I hid behind Kyle and attended the wedding. Unable to feel happy, I just looked down, waiting for time to pass. Since I came all this way, I decided to at least enjoy the food. Just as we were about to move to the party venue after the ceremony, a staff member approached me. Isabella has requested to see you. She says she has something to tell you. Confused but summoned by today's main character, I informed Kyle and was led to the dressing room. Isabella, having changed her outfit, was switching her accessories.
Can you leave us alone?
Oh, yes. But the party is starting soon, so please don't take too long.
I know. Just leave us be.
Shouted at by Isabella, the staff member half walked, half ran out of the room.
What do you want now?
Muttering complaints, Isabella reapplied her lipstick and glared at me.
Do you know why I called you here? No clue. If I don't spell it out, you won't get it, huh? This is the problem with the uneducated. What do you want to say?
I asked, barely containing my irritation, wondering if she'd summoned me just to insult me.
If you don't get it, I'll be blunt. I'll tell everyone you left early, so can you just go now? What?
Shocked that Isabella would say such a thing, I was at a loss for words. Isabella continued with a displeased tone.
I didn't think you'd have the nerve to stay for the party, too. Really, you've got some nerve. It's people like Heather who don't know their place.
Though Isabella's taunting was annoying, I indeed wanted to leave. If it was her suggestion, Leonard and Karen couldn't complain later. It would be a shame not to eat the food, but it's infinitely better than having to force a smile just to celebrate for appearance's sake. Understood. Deciding that staying any longer was pointless, I reached for my smartphone to inform Kyle, intending to leave promptly.
Ah, wait. It's dirty, let me clean it up for you.
Huh? As soon as I turned at the nonsensical words, I felt a cold shock on my face and crumbled to the ground. What's this, water and flowers? Looking up, Isabella was holding a vase that had been on the table. Water dripped from the vase as Isabella smirked maliciously.
Now you're clean. The flowers are a bonus. I've graced your plain face with them. No need to thank me.
Isabella said this gleefully and reached for the intercom.
Oh, I'm sorry. My sister-in-law tripped and knocked over a vase. I have to go to the party, so could you take care of the rest?
After a brief exchange, Isabella tossed the vase in my direction. It rolled across the carpeted floor and stopped at my fingertips. I've endured snide remarks and insults before, but this direct aggression was a first, leaving me in shock.
Finally, I feel refreshed. Oh, and don't bother coming to the party venue. It would be a nuisance to have your presence known.
Now I understand. Isabella's words clicked. Normally, Kyle, Leonard, and Karen are around. She wouldn't dare cross certain lines with them present. Getting home in this state would be challenging, let alone attending the party. Isabella looked at my dismayed form and laughed triumphantly. Just as I was getting emotional, I heard someone running towards the door. The situation changed dramatically as the door swung open.
What have you done to her?
It wasn't a staff member but a man, seemingly the groom, breathing heavily. And holding a bouquet of bright red roses.
Oh, nothing. She just fell and doused herself with the vase water.
Isabella said calmly, then her eyes lit up at the sight of the bouquet.
Wow, bright red roses. Beautiful. Is this a surprise?
This is.
I'm so happy. Did you remember I said I'd change into a red dress? Let's go to the party. She's fine. I've already called the staff, and she has nothing to do with us.
Nothing to do? The groom glanced at Isabella, who had looped her arm through his, then shrugged her off. And came over to me, pulling out a handkerchief. Please use this.
Thank you.
I accepted it, but glancing at the time, I saw the party was about to start. Please, go ahead to the party. I'll be fine. I disliked Isabella, but the groom and other guests who were looking forward to today weren't to blame. I didn't want to cause trouble for them because of me.
Let's go. Leave the sister-in-law behind. She's irrelevant.
Sister-in-law? You just said she was unrelated.
Ah.
Hearing my reluctance, Isabella slipped up. Frozen with a "I've messed up" expression. She was ignored as the groom turned to smile at me warmly.
I wouldn't neglect someone who's done so much for us. Especially if she's the sister-in-law. What?
Our voices overlapped in confusion. Had I done something to be called a benefactor? Recalling the groom's face, I finally remembered.
Could it be? You're the family of the lovely grandma who used our facility. Yes. You were a great help to us then.
Indeed. He was the family member who had thanked me, calling it a blessing to have met me, the caregiver of his lovely grandma.
Never thought my fiancé's sister-in-law would be the caregiver who helped us so much. Back then, I only knew your surname, and she only mentioned she had a brother who was married. Wait, you know each other? And benefactor? Your grandmother passed away a while ago, right?
Isabella was confused, her face full of question marks.
Yes. Heather was the one who cared for our grandmother passionately until the end on behalf of our family.
Caught off guard by the unexpected connection, Isabella panicked. After a moment, Isabella turned a forced smile towards the groom.
So, that was it. Let's go to the party, everyone is waiting. What about Heather? Let the staff take care of her. Honestly, Heather can be so clumsy. She came all this way to wish us well, only to trip and drench herself.
It's astonishing how she can lie so brazenly. While I was drying off with a towel given by the staff, astounded by Isabella's demeanor, the groom said in disbelief,
I didn't think you were that kind of person. What?
Leaving a stunned Isabella behind, the groom picked up a decorative book from the room's windowsill. It turned out to be a case, and when he opened it, a handheld camera was inside.
What's that? You were recording secretly.
I'm sorry for recording without asking.
You rushed the wedding, and I hadn't properly proposed, so I thought I'd surprise you with a proposal.
Watching a speechless Isabella, the groom continued matter-of-factly.
The plan was this. After you finished changing, I'd come to fetch you from the dressing room. Alone in the room, I'd propose again. If you accepted, I'd lift you in my arms, filming it all the way to the party venue. Then, play it live at the venue as a surprise. That was the plan. Live!
Isabella turned pale all at once.
I canceled streaming it to the venue because of the unexpected guest, but I saw everything. All of your actions.
The groom glanced at me, then said with self-mockery,
Never expected such a surprise, though.
Isabella was trembling slightly, a mix of anger and panic evident on her face.
You always found reasons not to let Heather or Kyle meet me, but I understand why today. For you, academic credentials and appearance are most important. But you said it. That smart and beautiful people should be recognized.
You misunderstood.
I said people who polish their skills, whether in studies or appearance, through effort should be appreciated. But that doesn't give anyone the right to look down on others.
Rebuked sharply by the groom, Isabella was at a loss for words. The groom, leaving the rose bouquet on the floor, told her quietly,
I'm not planning to cancel the party now, but we'll need to talk about what to do next.
With those words, the groom left, and Isabella collapsed to her knees, stunned. Then, she glared at me fiercely.
This is the worst. You've ruined my wedding, you low-educated, plain woman. I'll sue you.
Realizing pretending to be nice was futile, she revealed her true nature and yelled at me, but I was surprisingly calm.
Suing me would only make you lose. But if you think that's best, go ahead. What did you say? Well, it's true, isn't it? You're the one who threw the vase water on me, and you're the one who lied. And all of it is recorded. It's your own fault the wedding is ruined.
Isabella, not expecting such a strong retort, gasped, then her expression changed.
Shut up. I hate you. Get out of my sight.
In a near frenzy, she picked up the rose bouquet and threw it at me before slamming the door shut. The sound of the bouquet scattering followed by Isabella's angry cries echoed. Soon, Kyle, Leonard, and Karen appeared, possibly called by the staff. Kyle immediately showed concern for my drenched state, while Leonard and Karen, confused, paid no attention to me but to their rampaging daughter in the dressing room. When asked to explain, the groom showed the video, leaving Leonard and Karen speechless and Kyle visibly angry. Her behavior is way over the line. We shouldn't have left you alone with her. Sorry for putting you through this.
It's okay, I gave it back to her. I feel better now.
Addressing the bewildered Leonard and Karen, I said,
I don't have a change of clothes, so I'll be leaving. Besides, she won't be calm with me around.
Leonard and Karen seemed relieved at my words. Is that so? Then I'll leave the rest to you. Please, go ahead without me.
The day belongs to her, after all. Please forgive her.
No matter what kind of daughter she is, for Leonard and Karen, their own daughter will always be dearer than their son's wife. That's probably just how it is. While I sighed in disbelief, Kyle embraced my shoulder and addressed them with a serious tone.
I can't remain silent any longer as her husband after what she's been through. I'm sorry, but from now on, we'll be keeping our distance. Take care.
Stunned by Kyle's firm declaration, they were left speechless. We left the venue hand in hand. The party started several minutes late, but Isabella, the bride, could not hide her irritation, shouting and yelling, and it was eventually called off. Reportedly, dismayed by her behavior, the groom sought a divorce. And less than a month after the ceremony, Isabella found herself single again. Isabella claims that her divorce is my fault, but it's clear to anyone that she's responsible for her own actions. I have no sympathy for her, seeing it as the result of her constant belittling of others. Now, estranged from the in-laws. Do you ever feel lonely being away from your real family? I asked, but Kyle simply said,
What are you talking about? I have you, and besides, we're expecting to grow our family, aren't we?
Kyle's hand caressed my swollen belly.
Let's build a warm home for this child, too.
He smiled as he tenderly looked at me, and our unborn child was as warm as a sunny spot. I'm sure that with him, a happy future awaits.